I want to talk to you about something that I was trying to think of how to describe what I want to talk about, but I would only describe it as the mind knows not what the ear wants to hear. Okay, so if you ask somebody what kind of music they like or what kind of music they would want to hear, like what kind of music should be made, they'll say to you, fresh music, new ideas, new stuff, more innovative, more creative. Of course they're going to say that. But they gravitate to what I guess you could only say I'm having trouble figuring out if I should wear my glasses or not. They gravitate to the same old. Why is that? That a person can be so ready to say we should be doing new things, we should be doing bolder things, we should be doing bigger things, creative things, new, leave the past behind, move forward, be progressive, as it seems, those values are tied intrinsically with art and creation. But then they go back and they kind of just go after the stuff they've always known and have always listened to. Why is that? Why do we do that? So I want to talk to you just about a writer and thinker named Malcom Gladwell, who did a TED Talk. He did a lot of really cool stuff, but I'm just going to talk specifically about his TED Talk that he did about spaghetti sauce. Malcom Gladwell, spaghetti sauce. Look it up on TED. It's an amazing talk. It's really it's a brain opener for sure. And I would love to just regurgitate the whole thing right now, but what I'm going to do is just take a little piece out of it. He talks about a guy named Howard Moskowitz who revolutionized the way that spaghetti sauce is done. And, like I said, I could just steal his talk, but I'm going to just zero in on this one part where Gladwell says, if you ask somebody what kind of coffee they like, they would say dark, rich, hearty roast. Dark, rich, hearty roast. Everybody says dark, rich, hearty roast. Everybody says that. It's just the answer, right? But the truth is, most people don't like a dark, rich, hearty roast. They like a weak, milky coffee, and often very sweet. So it's an interesting thing, and it's not something to criticize people for. You see, the thing is, the brain doesn't know how to answer some of those questions. That's a real challenge, right? And I think that this is the same when you talk to people about what they want to hear, what kind of music would be the best kind of music to make. They say original, fresh, challenging, but what they really want to do is go to the safe, the known, right? So this is why you see, like, for instance, this summer, just fixing my camera here. This summer, Tool released their first album in 13 years. I talk about it a lot. I'm a huge Tool fan. And they unseated Taylor Swift from the iTunes top charts. I don't look at these charts, so I don't know if they're like the top charts, the best of. Like, I don't know. I think it's sales. Anyway, Taylor Swift fans went mental. Like, they lost their minds. And some of the stuff that they were saying on Twitter was actually really funny because they don't know who Tool is. Like, when Tool released their last album before this one, most of those people were in diapers at the time, but they're like, oh, we got to rise up and push back on Tool and, be part of the resistance. Like, resistance against what? Like, what exactly is happening? And there's a one that I love from a few years ago when in the Grammys, Arcade Fire won for Best New Artist, and they beat Justin Bieber. And the thing is, Arcade Fire is a pretty well-known band. Like, this is not like reaching way into sort of the depths. This is like a fairly well-known band, but people didn't know who they were and went crazy. Like, actually, the stuff that was on Twitter when Taylor Swift was unseated by Tool and Justin Bieber lost to Arcade Fire. Like, the stuff on Twitter it's funny. It's sort of disturbing in a way because some of it's like, God, what are you even thinking about? But it does prove and sort of reinforce the thing that I was saying about how people don't like going to a place that's unfamiliar. And this is why, when you dial up Netflix, what do? You watch The Office because it's so comfortable and so familiar and so easy to just get in there, right? So the thing about this is actually a defense, not a defense, but it's like a survival system the brain has. It works with the known, it identifies it, and it builds with what it knows, right? Because you can't build with something you don't know and something you don't understand. And, okay, so, it's harder for the imagination to imagine something that doesn't exist, or even more so, leave space that maybe later I'll find something that I like what could that look like? Of course you can't imagine that. Much easier to kind of go like, this is what I know works, and this is what I know I have liked in the past, and therefore I can make judgments about what I like in the future. And it's not just about what you like and don't like, but it's just conceiving reality. So for instance, if you go back to the time of horse and buggy, and you say to somebody, what could you build? What could you invent that would improve your transportation experience? They would say, well, faster horse, larger buggy, Because what are they supposed to say? Well, a Prius would be nice. How is somebody from that era supposed to be able to make that, to figure that out, right? It's easy to sneer at that and go those people are foolish, but these instincts, they actually protect us and they help us to kind of build lives that work. So we can't be too critical. But here's the thing. This is why new things have trouble penetrating the minds of the masses. It's not just music, but I'm a music guy and some music video blog, so this is what I'm talking about. And I'm not actually so different. A lot of my music is verse, chorus, verse. Not all, but it's a lot of verse, chorus, verse. A lot of major, minor modes. My songs are rarely too long, by radio standards. A few, but not all. Rarely too short. I use traditional rock instrumentation: bass, drums, guitar, vocal. That's you're not gonna get a klezmer. Well, maybe in my music, but generally I don't use it. And so I guess what I'm saying is I'm actually not that far off the beaten path. My music's not that unusual. It's a little bit, but it's not you don't listen to it go where is this coming from? But here's the thing is, the norm, what we think of as the norm, is such a small aperture that anything that's even a little different seems like it's hugely different. So think for a second about Drake and Kanye West, right? Two rappers. And if you ask Drake fans and Kanye fans, they're going to be totally different. Totally different people, totally different sound, totally different music, nothing like. While in fact, from every analytical direction, any way you want to break it down, the two forms of music, their music is nearly identical, right? Songs done in 4/4 time, rap style, BPM between 100 and 130, if that. Verse, chorus, verse, form 3 to 4 minutes long, and it's about cultural stuff. It's about personal experiences. Sometimes it's call out stuff. It's very autobiographical in nature. And the engineering of it, which is a big part. A lot of lay people don't sometimes appreciate how much that defines what you hear. The engineering is the same kind of compression, the same kind of EQ. It's the same loudness, creation. So from every way that you can analyze Drake and Kanye West, they're almost identical. They're almost exactly alike, right? There's tiny differences. But if you look at those two acts and you consider them to be completely different, then what I do must seem like it's from a completely different galaxy. It must seem like you're making contact with aliens for the first time. So I'm going to just hold that for a second, okay? I just want to talk about what's sort of out of the ordinary. Okay, so I've talked about what's out of the ordinary and how we perceive it and why we have trouble perceiving it. We're just going to hold that for a second. The other thing that's kind of important to touch on if we're talking about this is musical literacy. And when I talk about musical literacy is having enough know-how about, or enough understanding of how music works to be able to do basic analysis, just to be kind of go, okay, that sounds like allegro tempo. That's not a really tough call. That's a range of speed. But if you don't even know what the word tempo means, then that's not something you can sort of figure out. So I want you to just jump back with me 100 years ago. In every home we had a piano, and there in every home, well, maybe not every single home, but by far the majority, there's a piano, there's an instrument of some kind, and somebody in the family who could play it, and not just play it, but could read some music and play it, right? And that's because if you wanted to hear music, you had to make music, right? I'm talking about just before the radio sort of became a really big thing. If you want music in your home, somebody has to play it, right? And if there's a specific song you want to hear, maybe you want to hear, chamber music, so you got to get 4 string musicians together, and they got to read music, so they have to have a certain amount of music literacy. I'm not talking about mastery, just enough to be able to go oh, here's some sheet music and put it up, and just have the ability to kind of work your way through the song, right? And this was not what you would call an extremely fringe skill. This is not something where like very few people can do this. It's just something that most people kind of got some education in because, like I said, if you wanted music, that's how you got it. So enter radio, which I think is a great thing. I mean, it brings gifts with it, but it also brought this interesting thing where the music is not something you create, it's something that's delivered to you, right? So you don't kind of go like, well, I really want to hear that song, so I'm going to learn how to play it. You go like, you just listen to the radio. If you listen for long enough, someone will play it. And maybe it'll be like so much better. It'll be like a big band and like a internationally acclaimed, like famous singer or whatever. And that's how you get, that's over time, that's how we started to get our music. And there was this sort of change in how we thought about music from, I want to say like 1930 to kind of the mid 80s. And I can talk about why I chose that range, but it's basically around there where music in the minds of our culture made a transformation from something you do to something you buy, and something that is learned to something that is owned. Okay, and this is just, I'm just talking about the progress to the 80s, and even in the 80s, when I think by that time the commoditization of music, which is kind of where it ended up, had made most of its journey, so that people were no longer kind of thinking in terms of like, if I want to hear music, I'll make music. Like, I don't have to get somebody else to do it, I'll do it. Or even more so, like, I'll listen to music and make music, or I'll listen to music and I'll learn how to play it, and I'll play it with my family, my friends, we'll have a good time. And like, that was kind of out of the collective mind by the 80s. But even in the 80s, like, it's nothing like it is now. Like, at the time, if you wanted to leave your house and listen to music, you listen to the radio, which means you wait until somebody decides to play the song that you like, if they will even play it. Like, some songs that you like maybe don't end up on the radio. Like, if you want to hear Echoes by Pink Floyd, you're going to listen to the radio for literally years before you hear it, right? But, if you like the hits, if you kind of hang on, you'll hear it eventually. And this was kind of an era where there was a little bit more variety in what you heard on the radio. So it wasn't like, like now, if you want to hear a certain Taylor Swift song, you just got to wait like 15 minutes and you're going to be hearing it. Like, and maybe not even 15, but like 15 max, right? I actually did a drive in the mid 90s from Boston up to Ottawa. It was a long drive. I mean, I want to say like 8 hours or something like that. And this was, I want to say 95, kind of in that range. But the funny thing is, on the way back home, I played this little game with myself where if at any point wherever I was, I could find either Ironic by Alanis Morissette or Wonderwall by Oasis on the radio somewhere. So as soon as I would hear Wonderwall or whatever, and it would fade out, I'd turn the dial and I'd be like, okay. And I would get either Ironic or Wonderwall. So things kind of changed that way. Anyway, if you wanted to leave your house in the 80s and listen to music, you had to have a Walkman. Like, that's really the way to do it. And a cassette could hold like at most like 20 songs, right? Maybe it kind of depends on what you're putting on it, but like 20-ish, right? And you can comfortably carry 2 to maybe 8 cassettes on you at a time before it starts getting stupid. Where you're holding things like a bandolier, which you would put, like, if you're like a Sandinista and you're putting ammunition in, except you got like your cassettes, like, oh, here's Madonna and here's Weird Al Yankovic or whatever. And so the kind of portability we had at the time was way past anything we'd had in the past. But if you wanted to pick the song that you want, this is key, because picking the song you want is the key to commoditization, right? Listening to the radio takes us a long jump there because it disassociates us from the ability to create something ourselves. But that ability to just pick the song you want was really kind of hitting its stride by the mid 90s, and a little bit further when MP3s kind of became a thing. So now I have 76 gigabytes of music, literally like 10,000 songs on my phone at any time. And if I want to hear something that's not on my phone, it will take me probably 10 to 60 seconds to acquire it and hear it from anywhere in the world, right? And so what I think kind of became cemented from the 30s to the 80s in terms of transforming music from something you do to something that you buy, from the 80s to the present day, like 40 years later, we're now at a point where even young people who want to create music generally don't think in terms of musical literacy. They think in terms of samples, they think in terms of loops, And that's how they build songs. So they can build complete songs without an awareness, and especially if they rap, they can build a complete song without any awareness of key signature, time signature, voice leading, like all that stuff that used to be a thing. And as much as it sounds like I'm making a criticism, I'm actually not, because with every leap forward, even though they bring challenges and maybe something that we used to treasure is taken away, we get new gifts, right? Because like, when in history could we make a song just by putting pieces together and sort of found object building and stuff like that? But I'm mentioning it because it's this combination of avoidance of the unknown and narrowing our aperture. So two things which we think of as being very, very, very different are actually nearly identical. So there's that, and the lack of musical literacy that allows us to analyze a song and go, okay, well, here's what's going on in that song. Those two things being absent create a culture in which we are scared and uncomfortable when we hear new things. Okay? Even though we say, oh, I totally love fresh music, I love fresh stuff, I love it when it's innovative and creative. It's funny because remember this thing when Justin Timberlake, you remember that album he released with Sexy Back on it? I don't remember what it's called, but I remember hearing this interview about 2 weeks out from the release where he's on the radio and they're like, what kind of album is it, Justin? He's like, oh man, you've never heard anything like this before. Like, we did some stuff that's so different, and it's like it's from another planet. And I'm like, okay, all right, you got me. I'm curious. I listen to him like, whatever, right? Like, oh, you produced like 12 songs in 4/4, 120 beats a minute about having sex. Really outside the box, And I love Justin Timberlake, but come on, give me a break. So we're now in a place where music is created by businessmen, designed by businessmen, marketed by businessmen who their skills were learned by, like, they if they're not selling music, then they can transfer those skills to selling refrigerators or soda pop or like whatever. And that product, before it leaves them and arrives at you, is controlled by organized crime before it gets to the radio. If you don't believe me, that's fine, but read Frederick Dannon's Hitmen, book Hitmen from 1991, and it's not just that book. Like, you can corroborate this anyway, but I'm not going to get into independent promoters and stuff. But trust me when I tell you, the process by which music is created, who conceives it, who markets it, how it gets to you, is not about creativity, and it's definitely not about taking any chances and doing something new. So the obvious thing for me to say is to say, open your minds, let red heaven be your taxi ride out of mediocrity. And honestly, I would love to brag that, but I don't know if I can brag that myself. I want to be a leader in terms of doing new things, but I'm still learning and growing and figuring out how to do things that are genuinely new. And like anyone else, I mean, the ocean of approval and praise when I give people something familiar that they like is addictive. And I feel bad when I play something and people wrinkle their nose and they're like, that is too weird for me. Like, I'm not into it. And, of course, then they don't buy my album and stuff. And I'm like, that sort of thing. But I am trying to strike the balance between the two, where people can be taken to a new place, but also feel like, yeah, I really connect with this. Easy to say, it's an art that I'm still learning. I'm still trying to learn how to find that place. And I'm trying to challenge myself, not just to be a prisoner of that thinking that keeps rebuilding horse and buggy over and over again. You know what I mean? Echolocation challenged me not just to do new things, but also to take the stuff that I already knew and push and go further. And I did a lot of stuff that I hadn't done before, not just in terms of like musical vocabulary, but also the stuff I'd done previously on other albums, going deeper and more granular, putting things under the microscope further and pushing harder. And I really love the way that it came out. I don't know if I would hold it up and say this is the best that a musician can do. That would take a lot of balls. I don't mean it like that, but it definitely, I can say it's the best I could do right now. And in the future, I'm going to find new stuff that I can do that's past echolocation. And I'm already kind of exploring that anyway. But in the future, I'm going to push harder and harder to do more and build on the stuff that I already know. And the degree of success. Now, see, people often say to me, like, why aren't you famous? Which is like super sweet, super naive. super sweet, you know, and I appreciate it because what they're saying to me is, I like your music as much as I like whatever. But usually they only say it to me when they're familiar with it, when they've heard it several times, when they're comfortable with it, and then it moves into that space in their head where they know it, and then they're like, why aren't you famous like Justin Bieber? And I'm like, look at me. But what I am hoping to do is find that space between the known and the unknown where people can be challenged and people can be pushed and people can find meaning, but not so far out that it's like hearing a song in a different language, you know, where they're just turned off by the inability to access it. So these are just thoughts. These are just random things. I want to, like, again, I'm going to just go back and say, read Frederick Dannon's Hitman, 1991. And it's super interesting, super interesting. Like, it's dated now, but it tells you enough that you kind of get how things got built in the music industry. And check out Malcom Gladwell's talk about spaghetti sauce, because it's a mind opener and connects very strongly with the kind of stuff I'm talking about now. I might be wrong everything I'm saying, and I may come back tomorrow and do another video blog and be like, you know what, forget all that. But this is some of the stuff that's going through my mind now as I'm releasing this new album.